Okay, so we've got something to share. Let's see how this works. Okay, so they'll have to open up another window, but I think they can do the same thing. All right, so sorry about the delay. I think people can join us now. Make a note. Well, I'm sort of typing things to other folks and making sure they can find us. Patrick Bollier, am I saying that right this time? The last time I interviewed you, I was stumbling all over your pronunciation.
So the easiest way to remember it is to do a little bit of goofy sign language. So here we go. Hold your hands like this. If this was something that you ate out of, what would it be called?
A bowl, a bowl.
Bowl, your. So bowl, your, or your bowl backwards. Bowl, your.
I like how do you do a bowl in, I wonder what that really is in sign language. So, Rabbi Patrick Bollier. I don't know that this was better this time. I don't feel like it was any better, and I've been practicing for weeks and weeks now.
That's okay.
So there are, I know, inevitably going to be, well, I will clarify as I hear them. If there are words that I think are going to be hard for our non-Hebrew ears to hear, I will probably repeat them or ask what they are.
That's okay.
So if you'll give a little introduction to folks while I send messages out, that would be great. And I will put you in speaker view.
No problem. So my name is Rabbi Patrick Bollier. And I am, I suppose, part of the clergypreneur world in the sense that I have been a rabbi for 5 years, Jewish educator for 10 years. I'm the founder of a nonprofit called Punk Torah, or as I like to call it, the Punk Torah network of websites, which is a series of websites dedicated to independent Jewish spirituality. So our original blog was punktorah.org. That's now in archive. We also run an online synagogue that's completely lay-led, and that is called One Shul. So one is in the number one, so O-N-E, and then shul, which is the Yiddish word for synagogue, so one shul. And then Darshan Yeshiva is what I spend about 95% of my time on. And that is an online Jewish school that trains lay Jewish spiritual leaders, but then it also has a distance learning conversion to Judaism program. I like to tell people that it's the yeshiva, it's the school for Jewish beginners. So that's what I spend the majority of my time on. And then in addition to that, I am the founder of the community called Kehila, which is the most unoriginal name for a community possible because the word Kehila literally just means community. So I'm the founder of Kehila, which is a Jewish community south of the river here in Richmond, Virginia. Our mission statement is very simple. You matter. Mm-hmm. That's what I do.
Yeah, which I think is, I love that message from you, that you matter. I feel like you've really boiled things down to a core important piece. So it resonates. So thanks for the beginning introduction.
No problem. No problem.
Welcome officially. And I apologize to everybody for the technical difficulty. So we are using Zoom and then we broadcast to Facebook Live. And there is a failure happening with the Facebook Live piece. And so hopefully this is us being resourcefully successful. And while it is a little foreign to us, it'll be okay. So this is our money month. This is actually is it our last week? Are there 5 weeks? No, because August 1st is a Wednesday. So August will have 5 Wednesdays. This is our last Wednesday for July while we talk about sustainability or money. I'll change our view so that I'm not tiny. There you go. So we've asked Rabbi Patrick to come in and talk with us as a successful clergypreneur. And this ability to make money is a critical piece, and a piece that most faith leaders, if not everybody, as you begin to venture out, I don't know anybody who starts out with a secure, known single income or multiple incomes, unless they're doing just very traditional ministry. And so we'll talk today about money and some uncomfortable things that perhaps we avoid on occasions, but it's important that we're bold and honest as we talk about money. There's no point in banging one's head against the wall in ministry. If there's no viable financial model, don't spend 5 years figuring that out. Figure that out today, right?
Right.
If you can make corrections, make corrections. If you need to just altogether let go of something, that may be best course of action. But at Clergypreneurs, we tend to believe that if you are called to something, there's really something there. You are probably not the only person who senses that need, and that you are sensing that because people are affirming that call in you. So I'd like to start out, if we can. The second week of the month, we do a show and tell on the topic. And since you weren't here, Patrick, I wonder if you might be able to tell us, what are the financial tools that you use? What are the financial, arsenal or things that are in your toolbox for regarding finances? Off the top of your head, are there, 3, 4, 5? Are there a dozen things? Do you have a whole world of stuff, or do you focus on 1 or 2 things?
So how do you mean tools?
And it could be apps. It might be paper spreadsheets. It could be digital spreadsheets. When people pay you, how does that happen, and how do you keep track of it? At the end, when it comes to tax time,
Gotcha.
Are there tools that you use?
Yeah, so it depends on the circumstances. I'm a huge fan of electronic payment in general for everything. There is about a 3.1, 3.2% fee that you pay for those kinds of services. The standard rate for credit card processing is 2.9% plus 70 cents per transaction. And there's a few companies that are working to disrupt that. We'll see what comes of that, but that's sort of the standard now. So for the online school, we actually just switched to using entirely PayPal, which a lot of people are allergic to. But if you're like us and you're doing business outside of the United States, PayPal is actually preferred in a lot of countries where the banking system is not trusted. So I'm a huge fan of that. I also just have a personal issue with checks. I don't like having paper laying around. It's a useless thing to make. Electronic transactions can be tracked faster. And there's a little bit more equity, because if you have an electronic transaction, both parties have records of it. Whereas if you cut a check, in theory, if the person is using carbon paper, which no one has used in check writing for personal checks in a long time, there is no record of the piece of paper being handed over unless it's deposited in the bank. So it's just worthless, in my opinion, to do anything other than electronic payment. What tool you use, PayPal works for me for a couple of different things. I've used different software integrations like Square, Stripe, and it really just depends on what you're why you're using it, what do you hope to get out of it. I'm also a huge fan of Wave apps. That's the sort of, if you don't want to have to pay for something like QuickBooks, Wave apps is great. I use that for all of my financial ledgers. They also have a payroll program that I believe just started. I haven't used it yet, but I'm probably going to transition to that for a few things. I also love Gusto for payroll. They're terrific as well.
Can I ask you, it sounds like a dumb question, but the way that people misspell or creatively spell Wave apps, is it just WAVE?
Correct. Yep, Wave, like writing the wave, and then apps, APPS. I think it's waveapps.com.
Okay, I'm going to post that if I can find it quickly to the comments.
Yeah, and then definitely for payroll, I'm checking out Wave Apps, but Gusto is what I've been using, and I can't stress enough the importance of having a payroll system as opposed to getting involved with writing your own paychecks and all of that.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I think that is pretty in harmony with what Kathy and I had said as we were talking about things. We're pretty minimalistic. And I think that, we use 22 Social for a fair number of things, and 22 Social only uses PayPal. And I've found that to be, I kind of got forced into it, but I've been really happy about that. And I know that, 4 years ago when I started using PayPal, it felt like America was not enthusiastic about PayPal.
Yeah.
But it does seem to be, even if people kind of, in the same way that people aren't always super excited about Facebook, there's a little bit of reluctance in being there, but it does the job.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, the thing about PayPal is that the knee-jerk reaction that people have when they see PayPal is, oh, I don't have a PayPal account. So whatever, like let's say you're trying to have someone pay for a wedding or something like that. If you send them a link to pay an invoice and it says PayPal all over it, the first thing they're going to say is, well, I don't want to use my PayPal account. Well, it doesn't matter that it says Visa, MasterCard, everything else all over that same page. They zoom in on PayPal, freak out, and then you have to have a conversation about it. But, I've started now kind of going the extra step of saying, hey, you're going to see an invoice that says PayPal on it. You don't have to use PayPal. And that, I think, resolves that. Now, that's for something more intimate, like a one-on-one type of conversation. For the online school that we run, where we're not with every single student signing up, having a face-to-face conversation with them, I'm sure that there's, a little bit of sort of confusion, do I have to have a PayPal account and all that? But I honestly, at this point, I feel like it's a lot more even than it was maybe 3-4 years ago when Americans, like you said, were just allergic to PayPal.
So Darshan Yeshiva is the online school, and I just put that in the links also. Kilhea, how do I spell that and find that website?
So Kehila.
Kehila.
Okay, so KEHILLAH. So that's Kehila. And then RVA, which is what people use to stand for Richmond, Virginia. So KehilaRVA.org. And that's a brand new site. It just went up. So it's a little bit skeletal at this point, but we're working on it. It's got some fun stuff on there.
I was going to say, I like the picture that popped up right away. So.
Well, thanks.
And I have 2 or 3 of your business cards. I will be distributing as I bump into people. I just don't have it right here in front of me.
Thank you.
Yeah. And I know that, and yeah, so I'll ask you, okay, so with the Clergypreneur piece going on, this may be a little bit of introductory piece, but in our group, what people's trials are and the decisions that we make as clergy are the discussion, right? So you were at Boneh Kodesh, and that has, what's the right word for what they've done? Disbanded?
Yeah, whatever word you want to use. The congregation had gone through a lot, and I was brought in, and it was the past 2 years of being with the congregation was really about visioning what it could be for the future. And I think because of all of the stress and strain that they had been through and all the difficulties over the 5 years that it had been a community, that folding was the best option available. And so that's what they chose.
Mm-hmm. So with Boneh Kodesh, well, it was a fairly non-traditional community. It didn't have its own building, right? And was, I feel like you're doing some pretty creative, very cool, very hip things.
Thank you.
But they basically sort of decided they could not afford a pastor, which we all here know is, sort of the world that we swim in. How is Kahila going to be different than what was not a traditional pastoral role? It was half-time, but you were the pastor, right? And you're going to be the pastor, or are the pastor now, of Kahila. How are these different, I guess, is the one simple way of asking.
Sure. So the first thing I'll say is not pastor, rabbi. So just kind of fix that real quick. So I'll kind of, there's sort of some assumptions there that I want to fix. So the first question is, when a congregation, I'm speaking more broadly and not just about B'nai Kodesh, but when a community says it can't afford clergy, it's not saying it can't. It's saying it won't. And it's very important as clergy that we understand that. It's not can't. It's seldom can't. It's won't. And that's kind of an ouch, but I think it's important that we start thinking like that. I've found among my colleagues that there is sort of an assumption that we have allowed in sort of religious community, and the more liberal or progressive or open, whatever word you want to use, the denomination or the religion happens to be, the more I think we should find ourselves guilty of this. We like to preach and teach an idea that the very existence of community is a miracle, and that we are just struggling all the time. We are just this scrappy little group of Protestants or Jews or whatever. And my God, I mean, it is just, we are ready at all times to just like suffer for this thing. And it's a very negative view of community. Now, the flip side of that is prosperity gospel, and the idea that, and there really isn't much of an example of this in Judaism, but I come from the South of them. And so I've seen this prosperity gospel thing since the 80s of like, Jesus wants you to have a $73 million jet. Right? That's kind of the polar opposite of like, my God, if we can just get $10, we can afford the potluck. If you can just deeply reach into your pockets and give us a quarter, right? Like that right. Kind of dichotomy. So right. Part of my hope for the future, I think I lost you there for a sec. What was that?
I was just doing a visual. Yeah, they're just so polar opposite.
Yeah, but think about people that you know and communities you've been a part of. The more sort of liberal, open, progressive you are, the more you're going to get into that category of like the whole purpose of community is to suffer and to feel like you are not deserving of anything on some level. I mean, I don't know if it's like a perverse sort of Calvinism or something that's taken in the wrong direction of like, it's a miracle you're even alive. Like, I don't know where that, whatever, but I'm of course using a lot of hyperbole here, but we need to get out of that mindset that it's a miracle that anyone gives you $5 and you're not really deserving of it in the first place. Like we've got to break that, because for some reason clergy, we are so stuck in that, and I don't know where that comes from. A big part of what the board and I of Kahila have been talking about within the idea of you matter is that the clergy matters, right? The clergy matters. The volunteers matter. The board matters. And when you really focus on this belief, this very firmly held conviction that people matter, you don't have time for the sort of suffering servant, which isn't even part of Jewish theology, but like the suffering servant attitude. Right. So that's kind of the important thing. So what is the difference, I would say, between what we think of as a traditional religious community and something like a Kahila? Because Kihila is its own model, and it'll work in its own way. But let's talk maybe a bit more broadly, because I think that might be more helpful for
Sure.
people watching this. Because there's things we may or may not do that, from a replication standpoint, don't make sense. The most important thing, I think, for clergy today in the United States who want to sort of be clergypreneurs is to truly own that. So with Kihila, I am actually the president of the board. And that is a very big difference from communities, churches, synagogues, mosques, where there's a board or a committee, and those people hire the clergy for some contractual length of time, things like that. So I, as clergy, am far more integrated into the board system with something like a Kihila or Darshan Yeshiva, where I'm the president of the board there as well. Now, there's a balance against that, which is you have other board members, and those people have a lot of authority, so that if you are a person who is the clergy and you're the president or vice president of the board, you do not run your own show. You have advisors, you have people who you're responsible to, in addition to your community, so that if you do step out of line, if you do something that you shouldn't do, there are repercussions to that. So if you choose a nonprofit model, I think that's the way to do it. I know you've worked with clergy who've chosen more of an independent contractor type of way of doing things and sort of bouncing in and out of different organizations that way. And that's a model for a lot of clergy as well. You know, they actually come into churches and synagogues as independent contractors. I believe that there needs to be more integration, particularly if you're starting something. I had a dear friend of mine who he was going to get involved with this project, and it was a nonprofit that was being worked on, and he was going to devote, I mean, he already was devoting 80 hours a week to the thing. And he and I talked, and I said, well, so are you the president of the board? He said, no. I said, well, do you have, are you just a volunteer? And he said, yeah. And I said, do you have any hopes to be salaried since you're putting so much time in? And he said, well, one day they'll pay me. And I said, no, that's not healthy. You can't get into that mindset, because that's still sort of it's a miracle I'm even here. I deserve to suffer type of mindset. So from a business standpoint, if you choose the nonprofit model, being a voting member of the board is the only way I think that you can go. And that's, I would say, the biggest difference between something like a Kihila and, let's say, a Bonei Kodesh or a temple, whatever.
Right. Okay, cool. So what is your comfort level with the whole money conversation, talking about money as regards to your ministries?
Sure, I'm extremely comfortable with it, and I think that it's insulting that other clergy aren't. You insult yourself, not you as an individual, but if you are clergy and you refuse to talk about money, you are only insulting yourself. And the reason that you're insulting yourself is you're saying you don't matter.
For me, once that's sort of like, if this were a wheel, is this like the center? Is this the hub, or is this one of the many facets? So, is this on the end of a spoke? Or, but I digress. Let me ask this way, because I know that you thought about this before coming into it. Well, how about this? What are the things that we might be uncomfortable talking about when it comes to money? Are there things that come to mind for you if I ask that kind of a question? What do we tend to avoid as clergy?
Yeah, so there's a story in the Torah, in the 5 books of Moses. I like to tell this as kind of a joke. So Bezalel, who is the crafter of the temple, and Jay's smiling because he knows the story I'm about to tell. He's crafting the temple, and Moses has put the call out to the Hebrews to bring gold and silver and other materials that they have, which would have been the spoils of Egypt. And they're supposed to bring it, and it's almost like a habitat restore type of place where everyone's just kind of giving their stuff so that property can get built, so the temple can get built, Mishkan. And all these people are bringing their. In the imagery I have is that you have a single file line that goes forever, and people are just dumping gold and silver and bronze and wool and all of these other things. And at a certain point, Moses says, stop, this is too much. This is overwhelming how much you're giving. So I like to tell that story because it's proof that the Bible has mythological themes, because no president or treasurer of a religious community has ever had to tell people to stop giving money. That's never happened ever in the history of building a building. So that's how we know that the Torah has mythological elements to it. But I think honestly, it's two things. So I think the first thing is when we say clergy are uncomfortable, lots of people are very comfortable. The problem is that the people who appear to be most comfortable are the people asking for the $73 million jets. The people who seem the least comfortable and are not talking about it are the people that we think of as truly doing God's work. And so it's just an unhealthy dichotomy. And so we have to force ourselves to become comfortable. And I don't know that there's any one particular thing that clergy are most uncomfortable with. Different traditions have different ways of doing things. In Judaism, we don't have sort of a pass the plate type of concept. We have a membership concept. I personally don't think that membership as a financial idea makes any sense. I think it's better to monetize different things. So if you're going to have let's say a Sunday school at your synagogue, you should charge tuition for it. And people will maybe think that that's uncomfortable, but parents will pay for soccer lessons or math tutoring or all kinds of other things. So there's no reason why you couldn't charge for a Sunday school program or a vacation Bible school or whatever your faith tradition happens to have. People will do things like building funds. This is more maybe more my radical side. I think that we have a severe problem with real estate right now, and that buildings need to be monetized. So if you have property that's empty, basically 3 or 4 days a week, and there's all these nonprofits and all of these startup businesses that are all interested in property, then you need to become a landlord and you need to utilize that space. I think one of the things that's tricky for clergy is you're asked to do a million things, and now monetizing spiritual life is now 1,001 things. So if you can find in your community, and I'm speaking, more of sort of a church type community or synagogue type community. If you have someone who's entrepreneurial, if you have someone with a business background, talk to them and say, hey, we need to get the most out of our space that we can. Another thing too, and I was on an airplane and started just writing notes of things I wanted to remember, to think about going into this conversation. I think that we need to be a lot more serious about being bivocational. And when I say bivocational, I don't mean you serve two churches or you serve a church and a ministry. Sort of being pastor, rabbi, imam of more than one thing. I mean actually having a skill in the secular world that you can do part-time. When I was in the music business, all musicians ever talked about was wanting to tour and cut records and be a full-time musician. And a lot of the language I'm seeing now with clergy is exactly the same thing. It's, I want to be a full-time pastor. I want to be a full-time. And you look at communities like the African-American community in America, pastors in the Black church may have 3 or 4 jobs. And so, but I think some of us, our thing is, well, no, I need to be pastor so-and-so all the time. And it's like, you can be, but you also need to be an accountant, or you also need to be a lawyer or a doctor. In the Jewish community, really before we came to America, that was the norm. You would have rabbis that were kosher butchers. There's stories of rabbis who were vintners, who owned vineyards. Rambam, Maimonides, one of the most famous rabbis in history, was a doctor. Jesus, I've been told, was a carpenter. So, being bivocational is not some slight. It's not some sign that you're not good enough. It just means that the economy has changed. And so I feel like seminaries should be required by law, if they're going to take your money, that you should also have some sort of skill, or they should force you to learn at their expense what kind of skill you could have at the secular world. Because that financial freedom, I think, is very important for clergy. Probably the last thing is talking to individual donors, and then that's just a self-esteem thing. That's just being able to say, this church matters, this synagogue matters, you matter, our relationship matters, and there's a financial component that we need to deal with. And that's just self-esteem.
So with the bivocational piece, I feel like I'm hearing a couple of things that don't sit together, and I probably just need clarification. So is the bivocational piece, you said a lack, we need to be able to do that because there may not be enough money available for us to be able to do it full time. If a congregation can't have us doing that full time, does that conflict with what you were saying earlier, where it's not that they can't afford a pastor, it's that they won't pay for a pastor? Like, do we think that the money is there for people to live into a full-time calling, or do we not think that the money is there? Do you think?
Yeah, I mean, you'd have to audit every single church's books to figure that out. But I think the reality is that there are very few people who want to ask other people for money. And the case in point is, if you look at the occupational outlook in America, the sales industry, so selling anything, whether it's TVs or access to cybersecurity tools. Sales is a growing field. It's a growing need that this economy has. We are a service industry and intellectual industry economy more and more. And those jobs are fully available and no one will take them. And it's just because we are becoming, as a society, less and less interested in that kind of work. It just doesn't interest us. We don't want it. And so if you think about those skill sets of being able to sit down with someone and say, hey, what are your needs if you sell, whatever, wholesale ice cream or eyeglasses or whatever, if that skill set is on the decline and communities are really just collections of people, well, then that skill set as it pertains to fundraising and membership cultivation and things like that, that's going to decline as well. So you may have communities that have huge endowments, communities that sell, a 150-year-old building that was in an area that is now gentrifying, and now they're sitting on a cushion. So you may have that, and they may feel like, well, for the next 5 years, we could have someone full-time. But if there's no one who's regularly filling the coffers by having those financial conversations so that you're not just burning whatever money is in the bank, then they're going to say, okay, we need someone part-time because we as a community are not willing to do that work. We can't find someone. There are no volunteers who wish to do that. And my outlook is just look at what the government is saying. Jobs that require that kind of skill set and that kind of interest level are on the decline. And that just means that on the organized religion side, you'll also see a decline in that. So that's why I think being bivocational makes a lot of sense. Also, if you think about it as work for time, if you can do something like accountancy, paralegal, anything involving tech, web design, software, cybersecurity, particularly cybersecurity. You can make more money per hour doing that than you can being clergy. And so what you end up doing is you end up filling your bank account in one job enough that you can then take effectively a worse hourly rate as clergy, right? So I think that having a job where you are disconnecting from the clergy world is really good financially, but I also think it's emotionally healthy to know that you are secure. Again, it goes back to you matter, and you have to try to disconnect from that idea of, well, I'm only worth it if I get to do it full time. That's that punk musician attitude of, I just want to play gigs.
Yeah, I just saw a church using a model for ministry where I think there were like 6 or 7 different clergy on staff, but they were all bivocational.
Right. That's a super cool idea. I love that. And I don't know about the bivocational aspect, but you'll sometimes find, I think in the Jewish world, we're just now, because we're always at least 20 years behind the Protestant world, just by the fact that there aren't that many of us. So we don't have as much, there aren't as many laboratories of innovation in the Jewish community as there are in the Protestant world, just by virtue of numbers. But there's now a growing movement of rabbis who will take jobs in congregations or in nonprofits, and they have a very specific role in the way that megachurches might have a pastor only for youth, or a pastor only for music, or only for adult education, things like that. And I think that's spectacular. I think that that seminaries would be good to create those tracks, those technical, for lack of a better word, those occupational tracks. And that if you do, let's say, youth ministry for 10 years, and then suddenly you are no longer a youth and you can go back to school and do 5 credits and then have a new track. I think that would be fantastic. And the bivocational component to that, I think, is great as well.
So one of the things that, of course, I'm always trying to apply everything to my own context. So maybe I'll bounce this off you and see if it gives indications of anything. But so I sat down with a gentleman who is mentor to many others on their business ventures. And he and another guy are the founders of a local networking event, monthly networking event called Clergypreneurs. So they're retired guys who are helping other people with their entrepreneurial endeavors, just by virtue of they have this knowledge, and in their retirement years, they want to help other people. And so I've gone, Clergypreneur me has shown up, and now I sat down and had coffee with them. And my ministry model, and the people in this group will know that United Faith Leaders is trying to help connect clergy through profiles online with people in the general public, whether they're organizations or individuals. And he was suggesting that he didn't think that there was enough money in either side of this equation for it to be a viable ministry, but that third-party folks like himself, he's really neither, would be willing to write a check, for whatever, $100 a year, $500 a year, as a donor, because he wants it to exist. And so as I thought about it, I felt like he was changing, and this is more in the conversation of roles. My role, if I were to change my financial model, would mean that instead of most of the time being salesperson that I feel like I am right now, salesperson to clergy to help list their profiles, that I would turn into fundraiser, director of advancement, asking donors, here's what we do, here's what we think is valuable. And so I'd been brainstorming that a fair bit. And now I'm thinking of a whole different thing too. But what do you think of? Do you think we have to have both of those skills? You may be primarily one function, but you've also got to have all these secondary skills. So sales versus fundraising versus technical stuff.
Right. I mean, I would lump sales and, depending on the context, I would lump sales and fundraising into the same skill set.
Mhm.
And it's all about being able to sit down with someone and show the value of whatever it is that you have, or whatever it is you do, or whatever organization you happen to be speaking as part of, and to say very comfortably, and would you like to give $1,000 to support this opportunity? And to be comfortable with the fact that you may 99 times out of 100 hear no, but one time you'll hear yes, but you had to have the 99 in order to get to the one. And I think that's part of why I love the idea of people being bivocational, is that there are skill sets that the private sector teaches, like the resilience to deal with that. In the sales world, in the marketing world, you get told 99 times, no, I don't want to buy advertising from you. No, I don't want whatever product or service you have to offer. Rarely, though, do people then go into a closet and have an existential angst moment as to whether, selling TVs or shoes or ice cream bars is really what God wants for them in their life. Right? But how often do clergy have those kinds of moments because that donor that you were hoping would give you $1,000 has said no to you? And so that's that skill set. I mean, I keep going back to it like a broken record, but that skill set of being comfortable sitting down with someone and asking for money it is so crucial. You have to build that up if you want to be clergy. And one of the great ways to do that is actually to get a job in sales. Before you enter seminary, and see, can you have those kinds of conversations? If you love systematic theology, and you love giving a homily, and you love like playing acoustic guitar with kids, and like being the big brother at the church picnic or at the synagogue mixer, you don't have to have a title in order to do that. You can do that. God doesn't see the collar and say, "Oh, good, excellent, well done," right?
Right.
So trying something like a sales profession before going into the clergy, I think, is very important, because you have to be able to have those skills.
My personal confidence regarding sales definitely comes from commercial world experience.
Mm-hmm.
I am surprised actually at how good a salesperson I am, and in some regards how bad other people were at it, because all it felt like I needed to believe in what I was asking about. Like, I would not lie or try and sell somebody something that I was not.
Mm-hmm.
If I didn't think it was of value to you, I don't want you to have it. But being able to ask people a question is all it really felt like it amounted to. But people seem so reluctant to put a proposition out there where they might fail at it. So yeah, and at Kroger, when I worked at Kroger, they would always do different sales stuff, especially fundraising things. When your cashier asks you if you want to donate $1 to Leukemia Research Fund or something. And when I worked at Blockbuster Video, it used to have those, if you had like a particular membership, you got like one free movie a month, and the 10th one was free or something. Man, I sold those things like hotcakes. But it's that kind of experience that I feel like, just asking the question. Like, on one hand, it's sort of the power of suggestion, and on the other, like, you just need to believe in what you're talking about.
Yeah, and also, I think one of the issues that we find within the clergy is a belief that, from some people, that they shouldn't have to do that, right? That, like, it goes back to that little story I told, right? Like, people should just throw open their wallets because what your ministry does is so profound. Or, well, weren't you there when we, fed the hungry? Weren't you there when you saw that clothing ministry, or whatever? You should just be overwhelmed by the product. And the reality is you have to have communicators, and clergy are supposed to be communicators. That's the whole point. And yet something is lost there. And I think for some people, particularly people who have a lot of very highly academic seminary experience, that process, like you said, of asking questions is just not either something they were taught, or it's something they feel like they never should have had to engage with to begin with. And that's unfortunate.
Yeah. And this feels like sort of throwing stones at the church, where, I don't hold a staff position anymore on any congregation staff at this time. And, not especially interested in it in a traditional sense, but was I thinking, it sometimes feels like, and I think that this is probably only half of clergy people that I get this sense from, but it is almost as if graduating from seminary, one, and then getting, especially if it's a full-time gig, as a pastor, they do this. There's something like they've arrived and they do feel like that shouldn't be their job anymore. And it's not quite condescending, but it is sort of, they're just trying to set themselves apart, that I think is, I'm not comfortable with. And I don't think it's, like I said, I don't think it's everybody, but I think that it's something that's somewhere in some people's wiring. And I get it to some degree, because you work hard and you want to be past stuff. You get tired of it. I mean, I just said, I don't really want to be on a staff anymore,
Right. Well, another thing too that I just thought of, and this is something that I just believe in general, one of the great lessons that I learned from the music industry is the idea of living on royalties. That, you do work and it sits out there forever in the world, and you collect income from the success of whatever that thing happens to be. And so you have multiple income streams. And so why we would place a value, almost a moral value, on having one income stream versus 5, 6, 7, 10, 12, 30 is fascinating in a way. What is it about a person only doing one thing that somehow validates their self-worth? I have royalties that I get not from the music business, but royalties from other things I've done. And it's there was a Seinfeld episode about this years ago where Jerry keeps getting like checks for 7 cents or something like that. I mean, and whatever, but sometimes that's what it feels like. But the reality is that independence of doing that, I think, is freeing. And God is the God who, frees the slave, right? And so this idea that like you get one paycheck versus you get 5 paychecks. Well, who would you prefer to be? The person who gets one paycheck or the person who gets 5 paychecks?
Right.
I'd rather be the person who gets 5 paychecks, because guess what? If a church, in your case, closes, or in my case, if a synagogue decides it doesn't want to do things anymore, there's a comfort. It's not great. No one wants something like that to happen. It's very tragic. But you're going to be okay. And why that hasn't sort of been publicized as like the great miracle going forward in religious life in America is fascinating to me. Why we see that as a failure and not as a success is crazy to me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I definitely agree, and have to own that internal struggle exists for me, because I do instinctively, there's something about having one income that seems like that's what I wish to be able to communicate. That seems more stable. But I have also learned that I don't ever want to depend on a church for my livelihood again, because that can change. Like with any job, right? If you have one salary, one thing needs to go wrong, and you have no salary. Right? Hence the security that you're talking about. So being able to diversify is an asset. But even with the various ministry projects that I work on, Kathy has pushed back on me because I've kept United Faith Leaders very separate from my own identity. And I am just waking up to the fact that I want to just own that I do these 5 different things. I know it's confusing to other people.
I need to turn something off real quick, so I'm going to mute my microphone. I apologize.
Okay. So I do think that there's some value, definite value, and I encourage everybody to have multiple streams of income. And I think that the more incomes, the better, right? And so we want to push people in that direction.
Right. Yeah, sorry, my robot vacuum decided to go off in the middle of us talking. Yeah, absolutely. Agree completely. Again, though, one of the things that I was thinking about in preparation for us getting together was that you need to do what you're good at and what is going to help you to have the income level that you need. So if you get 5 paychecks a month, in our scenario, we're talking about how great that is opposed to 1. But if each of those 5 paychecks is only about $50, well, then you got a problem, right? So, that's where, again, I think it goes back to having a marketable skill that is independent of clergy life entirely. Whatever that may be. And that's where I think if there's a strata, I would guess, of clergypreneurship, I think sort of step 1 is people being like, okay, well, I love the idea of getting 5 paychecks. Let's do it. And then step 2 would be, okay, well, I kind of like the idea that I only serve a congregation quarter time and then do other things. Okay, as long as it's all pastoral or as long as it's all Jewish or related to Islam, okay, I'll get there. And then the next step is, oh, wait, so you're telling me I'm going to get these 5 paychecks, but one of them is going to be because I'm apparently a really great dog groomer. Okay, well, no, time out, can't do it. And I think that if there's a strata of trying to help clergy, that's the next one. That's the part that's kind of the, how do you help people get to that point? How do you help people figure out that you can do God's work by doing work that doesn't have a crucifix or a crescent or a Magen David attached to it? That you can be a holy person who communicates spiritual value in the world by being a great bartender. And that there is nothing wrong with that. And in fact, that is an ideal set of circumstances.
Right.
And I don't know what it's going to take to help clergy get to that next step. Maybe it's just a fundamental rethinking of the conversation. And maybe this is where the African-American church can help because it has this history of bivocational leadership and sort of looking to that church model and saying like, wow, you've been doing this in this country for so long, but so many of us think that we have to be one thing all the time to everyone. How do you do that? How does that work for you? Now, maybe the people you talk to would end up saying, well, really, I just want to be a pastor full time. And so, maybe it wouldn't end up working out so well. But I wouldn't be surprised if maybe that's where we could learn some lessons from.
Yeah. And even with my own work, right? I started driving several weeks ago for Lyft and Uber, right? Yeah. And so it is a really strange place to find myself. But it is also being able to do those things well. And it turns into, in the same way that a bartender gets to meet a whole bunch of people, I'm meeting a whole bunch of people that I would not otherwise meet and having pretty cool conversations in many cases.
Right.
It's not explicitly who is God to you, but I've had several discussions about the Bible. And I'm not like pushing anything on anyone. And,
Yeah.
one of my compliments was like, great conversation or whatever. So not condescending too much to other vocations or at all, I think.
No, and I think those, to get into a more spiritual, what we think of as spiritual perspective on all of this, being able to meet people. I mean, in both of our traditions, we believe that human beings are B'Tselem Elohim, made in the image of God. So if you meet someone in the image of God, driving for Lyft or Uber, it's the same experience as if you met them under a building with, insert religious iconography. So why we would have trouble with that on some level is kind of fascinating. I actually joked with my wife that so I believe firmly in many things, and one of those things that I believe in is that I make really good hummus, or some people say hummus. It's not, it's hummus. But anyway, that I make really good hummus. And so there's a little 800 square foot retail space available in a neighborhood here in Richmond. And I said to her, well, we could always go into the hummus business. And there's a really great restaurant in Philly called Dizengoff, where all they sell is hummus. And so I joked with my wife that, well, I mean, that's always an option. Let's open a hummuseria and see if that sticks. And the funny thing is that, when I think about that, and I think about the number of people that could be served and the number of people who could have a wonderful experience, and because of the culture that hummus comes from, being able to have a Jewish experience on some level, for me is fantastic. I think that's a home run. If more people would go into a place that sold bowls of hummus with, different great toppings, that would go into a synagogue, well, what's God's work at that point?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think this is actually a really good place to leave the conversation. If this is if people come away with this conversation of valuing multiple incomes, I feel like that's a fun place for us to end up today. Yeah. Thank you very much. I'm looking around to see if there are any questions so I don't overlook anything. We are broadcasting on Facebook and in YouTube, and I think we are clear with the comments. So thank you, Patrick. If you'll hang on here after I disconnect the live stream, I'll check in with you. But to everybody else, thanks for coming to Clergypreneurs Live. It is July 25th, and this has been Money Month, where we've been talking about the sustainability of being a clergypreneur. Thanks again, Patrick.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah.